the ruling. In the markets in the city, the FTSE 100 closed down 55 points on 69.97. The pound buys $1.11 and €1.13. LBC weather. Showers for Northern Ireland and Scotland tonight, but mostly dry further south and a low of 8. Showers moving across England and Wales tomorrow with sunshine and showers for Northern Ireland and Scotland. Highs of 18 degrees. From Global's newsroom, I'm Tim Daly.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Very good evening. It's 3 minutes past 8 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. Now, if you listen to the programme regularly, you'll know that on Thursdays at 8, we like to spend a bit of time with one person because so often in the media nowadays, it's just sort of 5-minute interviews and nobody really gets a chance to expand on what they want to say. Well, in this hour, we talk to someone for an hour and you get your chance to put questions to them as well. Well, today we're going to be talking to Steve Hartshorn. He's the National Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. He's served in the Metropolitan Police since 1995. And if you have a question for him, we'd love to put that to Steve. 0345 6060 973. We're also streaming this hour live on Global Player and on the LBC YouTube channel. Steve, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Now, you're a relatively newbie in the job, aren't you? I mean, what does the job involve?
Oh, it's huge. It's massive. I became the national chair in April this year, and it's bigger than I thought it was. Certainly, it's not a 40-hour week. I can say that for certain. It's a complete change from anything I've ever done before in policing, in terms of engagement with central government, senior figures who can have a real positive effect in policing. That's the biggest challenge for me to get to grips with it. It's a learning curve that if the post is for 3 years, it just won't stop. Every day something new happens to make me think, and how can we get the best results for our members?
And tell us a bit about your background, because as I say, you served in the Met since 1995. Tell us about the different jobs that you did.
I started in Barking and Dagenham in East London in 1995 and spent 10 fantastic years there dealing with every kind of crime you could possibly wish to imagine. At one time, Barking and Dagenham had the biggest council estate in Europe, and it was involved with residential burglary, domestic crime, commercial burglary, not so much sort of street robbery at the time, but that became quite prolific. Anything you can wish to imagine, I got a good grounding in how to deal with the public. I then had aspirations to move on to the Firearms Command, so in 2005 I'd passed my armed response vehicle course and went to Leman Street in East London and spent 13 years on armed response, again dealing with a different level of crime, in dealing anything from threats to kill to the immediate threat to life and some of the counter-terror jobs that came in, and then finally got a posting to the National Federation in 2018, and the rest is history.
Tell us about the armed response unit. I mean, how often would you get called out in an average week?
When you're on shift, and when we did 10-hour shifts then, and every single day something was happening, there was always calls from members of the public to someone seen in possession of a gun, someone acting strangely with a knife or on a weapon, and you have to take these calls seriously. So at the time when I first joined, we were quite a small unit. We could only maybe put out 5 or 6 armed response vehicles on a shift. Towards the end, sadly, because of the events in Paris at the Bataclan, we could then start to put out maybe 25 to 30 units a day. But there was always a challenge, there's always something there. And even if it was potentially quiet for a few hours, there was always a good opportunity to go back, support our colleagues on the front line and just deal with other types of crime where they might need an extra pair of hands.
And what's the psychological effect of doing a job like that? Because, I mean, in theory, any day it could be curtains if you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, facing the wrong person. And that's not just a pressure on you, but also your family.
Absolutely. It's I think this job is challenging. Physically, it's very impacted, but also mentally, as you've alluded to, because you go to work thinking, I'm going to do a job of work today. I'm going out there to do the very best I can. And what I will say, some of the training that we get is first class. I would put it against anybody's training in the world. It really equips you to deal with most of the scenarios that you're going to face. However, the public don't get the training. They don't get the same briefing, so they don't know how to react necessarily to what we do. At times it looks very chaotic, but when you've trained to that high degree with a team of people that you literally trust with your life, it works. And again, you do the best you can. And I do think every time we get it pretty much spot on. It might involve a lot of coarse language, which the public might not appreciate. However, it's far better to be a little bit industrial than to actually have to pull the trigger or use another potentially lethal use of force on somebody if it means everybody is safe.
And one other thing related to that, so often when there is, when a police officer shoots someone dead, they seem to be immediately under investigation, and people assume that they somehow are guilty. And I often think to myself, why would anyone do this job? Because you're on a hiding to nothing. It is a split-second decision that you have to take. You have been trained, so you hopefully won't get it wrong very, very often. But there are so many suspicions now that it is the police that are at fault in these incidents, rather than the person that, for whatever reason, has been shot.
You're absolutely right, and hindsight is an exact science which we tend to get judged by almost immediately. People perhaps make ill-informed comments based on what they think they know, based on something in social media, and they get it completely wrong. And all we've ever asked for is just to be allowed to have the time and space to do our evidential accounts. And that's how I became a Fed rep, believe it or not, because having been involved in some very high-profile jobs and then begin to understand what officers go through, I want to know more. And it might assist the listeners to understand there's a set process which we call it's the Firearms APP, the Authorised Professional Practice. And it's broken down to 4 stages where the first time, once a bullet has been discharged or something's happened where it needs investigating because of a police use of force, we'll give an initial account of the radio. So we call for support. We then return to a PIP, a post-incident location, where a set of facts is given to a senior officer, which gives a very brief outline of why we're there and what's taken place. And then probably within 5 or 6 hours, the officers have done a stage 3 account, which is their first personal initial account. And then they put down maybe in 3 or 4 paragraphs as to the reason why we're there, what they've done, and some of the circumstances. And then because it's usually quite traumatic for everybody involved, and to allow the body to come to terms with that trauma, the physical impact, the mental impact, and the brain to sort of settle down, they then generally go away for 2 periods of sleep, normally 48 hours. However, depending on the circumstances, it might be shorter, it might be longer. And then they come back for what's called a stage 4, which is a full detailed account. And that's where they can spend 10, 12, 18 hours writing or typing that full account to make sure they cover everything as much as they can. And I can say hand on heart, for me, it's the best process ever to get a really good, transparent, open, in-depth account of everything they think they've done. Obviously, body-worn video was, to us, a great asset because it then shows for the first time ever the actions that we do. However, it's not always the utopian answer because it's very one-dimensional. So we encourage our colleagues to, when they are writing their accounts, use the body-worn video if they're allowed to watch it, and quite often they're not.
Why wouldn't they be allowed to watch it?
Well, we also have the IOPC, the Independent Office of Police Conduct, who quite rightly provide oversight for our actions to make sure that we're doing things properly and in accordance with the law, powers, policy and regulations. At times they may say, no, you can't view that body-worn video for a variety of reasons. Perhaps they think it might prejudice our accounts. They don't want it to taint what we're saying, which is understandable to a degree. However, if you dig into the science of memory, it doesn't record in a linear fashion like it does on a video or a data stick, so you don't always remember things perfectly. And when we've done the stage 3 account, we've already alluded to some of the things that we think we can recall. So for me, the perfect scenario would be they do their written account, they can then have a period of time to watch the body-worn video, and then if their memory recollection is significantly different, say, here's what I thought I recalled on day, date, time, place, and then I've now had an opportunity to view the account. However, I can see it's different, but my honest whole belief at that time was that is what took place. And if I was to ask you if you witnessed an event to do an account, you'd probably remember most of it, but things might be different. And if I then showed you that on a video, you go, how did I not see that? Because we have things like selective attention, auditory exclusion, where for us as a police officer, you naturally look to the threat which is going to cause you or the member of the public the most. You'll focus on that to try and eliminate and deal with that threat as safely as you can. Certain academics have said that if you're looking at something, you don't hear something properly, and vice versa. If you hear something, you don't always see it properly. So there's lots of learning that we've had in the firearms world, which has got us to the place where we'd like a hybrid approach, do our accounts, watch the video, provide further. And then, of course, we all know that ultimately the job will either probably go to Crown Court, inquest, or even public inquiry. We have nothing against being open, honest and transparent in everything we do as a police officer, which is the right thing to be.
See, I rather predicted this would happen when I asked you about firearms, because I've got a text here from Nick who says, Ian, whatever the police go through, it cannot be as bad as what Jean-Charles de Menezes' family went through or are going through. He says he's a Mother Island veteran. I'm not sure I don't know if you know what that means. And it often comes back to that, doesn't it? And it's obviously a tragedy that happened. And then there's one or two other incidents where we think back to the Mark Duggan incident, which set off the London riots, and yet people don't, and whatever concerns there were about that, people don't see the day-to-day issues that you get involved with, and they automatically assume that the police are trigger happy, and therefore people lose their lives sort of needlessly. Why do you think people, and I don't mean everybody, but I mean certain groups of people automatically will take the side of whoever is against the police?
That's a great question, and I wish I could understand that, because if it did, I wouldn't be a police officer. I've been making a lot of money in dealing with the communication side of it. I think some of it is a lack of understanding about what our role actually is, about the threat, harm and risk that we face. And like you say, the day-to-day jobs that we do, my colleagues will have been out there on armed response today dealing with hundreds of events across the country, and it largely goes very, very smoothly. I think if you look at some of the figures, we actually discharge the firearms 0.1% time we actually deploy, which is a really incredibly small
0.1%.
Yeah, percent of the time we pull the trigger. I think on average, when I was involved on the armed response, we would probably have 2 shootings a year.
Did you ever have to shoot?
I haven't. Thankfully, I haven't had to do so, because it is very impactful. Even if you're stood next to a colleague that does affect you. It does make you think. It does make you wonder, why do we do this job? Even our legal advisors, our solicitors and barristers who speak to us say, why? We would advise you not to do it. It is so risky. However, somebody has to. It's a great job to do. It makes a real difference. When you're taking down hardcore organised criminals that are inflicting pain and suffering on the community, when you can take them away from that, you can really improve lives. And that's why it's worth it. It's nice to get involved to do something that makes a real difference. And there is no one else to do it.
Do you get frustrated sometimes by the depiction of the police in dramas? Because, I mean, half of the dramas on television seem to be surrounding something to do with policing from all different parts of the country. Do you watch these and you think, if only you knew the truth? Because, I mean, I suppose we all get our impressions of what policing is like, or indeed like the security services. I mean, I loved Spooks, but everyone I know who's involved in that said, I mean, it's fiction, and you have to treat it as fiction. Yeah. But you kind of think, well, it must be based on something.
It is, and I find it incredibly frustrating. I used to watch them all, and then I gave up because I'd find the blood pressure rising. And I think, why do the advisors not tell the producers do it properly?
Yeah.
And then a colleague of mine became an advisor on a set, and he basically said, look, they tell them all this to get it right, to get it done properly. But obviously they want dramatic effect. And a term I coined sort of during my time as a Federation rep on the team was, we've got the Hollywood effect, is people believe what's done on the film that we can do. Quite often we get said, why don't you shoot the gun out of their hand? If you're 30, 40 metres away with a hand pistol or even a rifle, it can be incredibly hard if they're moving. We have to stop the threat as quick as we can to stop potentially someone else being killed or seriously injured. So it's not quite as good as it looks on the films, and it is frustrating, and I just try to remember that it isn't real. But again, when we've done work with people such as yourselves in the media world and take them down to our training facility in Kent and they see what we do, they get it, they understand it, and we can put them on what's called the judgment range and let them have a go themselves at dealing with a shoot or no shoot scenario.
I can guarantee you that if I did that, I'd make the wrong decision every single time.
You'd be surprised.
And I used to own a gun, and I can fire a gun, but yeah. I suspect I'd be useless at it.
It's challenging because not only are you trying to do with the physical and tactical aspect of what you're doing, you're trying to think about the backdrop, the powers, your policy, the legislation. Is it the right thing to do? The age of the person you're engaging with. Because my biggest fear is at some point, and I take no pleasure in saying this, there is going to probably be a child that's going to be involved in the shooting. That is going to be heartbreaking, not least for the people of the family involved, but also the farms officers. And we are acutely aware of that. You mentioned it before on the text from your listener. some of the post-incident process we've had was brought in because we realised that we needed to get the accounts over quickly to give the family that understanding of what's taken place.
Controversial territory here, so
Okay.
you might want to think before you answer this one. Brian says, ask Steve if he would take the current Mayor of London out on a job and ask the Mayor how they should treat the incident.
I would love to. If I was operational, I would love to take the Mayor out on a job. I would take anybody out so they can see the hard work we do and the decisions.
When you say take the Mayor out...
Physically as opposed to tactically, no. It's look, we have to improve people understanding what we do, and if the locally called ride-alongs, yes, we would love to, because that way they can actually see what we do and understand it properly.
Right, I have a lot more to ask you, but we're going to come to your calls as well. 0345 6060973. You can text your question to 84850 or tweet at LBC or at Iain Dale. We're with Steve Hartshorn. If you've only just tuned in, he's the National Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. It's 18 minutes past 8.
LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
20 past 8 on LBC. Steve Hartshorn is with me, National Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. Some breaking news from the AFP news agency. Joe Biden is going to pardon anyone convicted of federal marijuana possession. I'm not quite sure I understand what federal marijuana possession means. I suppose under a federal crime, but why would it be a federal crime rather than the local one? I suppose the obvious question there, Steve, is should the UK follow suit?
Interesting question, and I think it's something that the public should be engaged with fully so that we can understand what they need. Certainly as police officers, we have to follow the law and we'll do what we are legally supposed to do. Practically wise, I think if you were to ask most police officers, they've probably had far more violence and troubles with alcohol and alcohol abuse than they probably have with marijuana or cannabis.
Because there are some police forces, I think Durham is one, where they basically said, we're not going to bother with prosecuting people for as long as it is for your own personal use, we're not going to do it, which caused a lot of controversy at the time because people saying, well, the law, it is illegal under the law, so therefore if it's illegal, you should be taking it to the full extent of the law. And I can see the argument on both sides here.
Yeah. For me, if you're going to deal with personal possession, you're going to take an officer or two officers off the streets or where they need to be. And if I was to walk out here tonight and probably go through Leicester Square, you could probably smell it within the first 10, 15 metres.
You can.
Yeah.
I said on the programme the other night when we were talking about whether cannabis should be classed as Class A rather than Class B, I said I was walking through Leicester Square and the person with me said, oh my God, can't you smell the cannabis?
Yeah.
And I couldn't, but I don't know why, I just can't. I don't even know what it smells like. but it's so prevalent along a lot of streets of London, I'm told.
It is, and if you were to walk and you were to arrest the first person you came across, that's going to take you 2, 3, 4 hours maybe, depending on the state of the person. They might have to go to hospital. It then takes you away from what you need to be doing. So I'd ask the government, before they think about changing any legislation, to actually have a proper public consultation, see what they want us to be doing, because that's who we're there to serve and look after.
Now, we have a new Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark. Is it Rowley or Rowley? I think it's Rowley, but that's what I'm going to stick to unless you know any different. Sadiq Khan was on LBC this morning, and he said what Londoners will see is a difference in response from this commissioner, who's not in denial, who's not being defensive, versus the previous one. And that's one of the reasons I lost confidence in her. I don't know if you want to comment on the circumstances surrounding Cressida Dick's dismissal, but are we going to see a real new Broom in Sir Mark Rowley?
I think we'll see a different Broom. I was listening to the show this morning, and I believe Mayor Khan called him a reforming commissioner. My only experience of working with Sir Mark Rowley was during the Duggan shooting when he was in charge of that command area, and he seemed to be very understanding. He seemed to want to balance the role of the police to make sure that we were getting it right, but also speak to the community to help understand what had taken place. And I think every new person in charge, much like myself included, wants to put their own mark on what they're doing. And there is a time and a place that we probably did need a reset in standards. We need a culture change within policing across the country. We also need resources to be able to do that properly, because if you've got people that feel they can't speak out, there's nowhere to go, then it becomes an endemic inside the service that we need to change very, very quickly.
Let's talk a little bit about standards, because Dame Louise Casey has been doing a report, I think, for Sadiq Khan on misogyny within the Met, and these WhatsApp groups where, I haven't seen the messages, but I think we can all imagine what they are. What, do you think the problem is as big as the Mayor does?
If I'm honest, I don't think it is. I think you've got isolated pockets that need to be dealt with quickly, swiftly, and that kind of culture has no place in policing. One, it's wrong. Two, it shouldn't be there. They shouldn't be police officers. If they can't go to work and be professional, they shouldn't be a police officer. Simple as that. There is no place for it. It undermines public confidence. And what kind of person are they? How are they going to deal with somebody? Because if they're typing some of that stuff that we hear about, and I've not seen it either, then it does make me question, can they deal with someone impartially and fairly, or are they going to use those prejudiced views for nefarious means?
There's been another story today, hasn't there, about somebody who serves in the Border Force, who used to be a police officer, and there are serving police officers within this WhatsApp group, which is full of, as I've read, racist remarks. Now, technology does provide the opportunity for like-minded people to share things between them, but what gets me is the stupidity of it, in that they must realise that if this sort of thing comes out, they are toast, or they should be toast.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Stupidity. They didn't realise, they didn't think, it's inappropriate, and they shouldn't be doing it. Simple as that. Even if it's off duty, they should all realise now that these groups, all it takes is one person to be caught and have the phone downloaded, and the history is there for everybody to see. I've said it before, there is no place for it whatsoever, and it should be dealt with very swiftly, appropriately as well, and to make sure that we can't have those kind of views in what we do.
Let's talk about burglaries, because over the last few years it's been a complaint of many people that they've been burgled and the police just aren't interested, don't respond, nothing has happened, that they know that they're not going to solve it. Now, the head of the National Police Chiefs Council, Martin Hewitt, has said that all burglaries will now be attended to. Is that the right thing?
Absolutely. Certainly when I joined as a junior police officer, we did attend every single burglary, because it was important that if you look at some of the operating methods of burglars, you might have one or two prolific burglars in your area, and they're responsible for probably 90-95% of those types of crime. So if you can get there, if you've got a chance to catch them, you can solve so many problems. It's also good for community engagement, because we had a policy years ago. You go to a burglary in a dwelling, you deal with the house it was, you'd learn your craft at how to investigate a crime, you get a scene to crime officer down, but you'd also go and knock on doors either side. You'd at least do a minimum of 4 doors either side, 4 doors opposite. People are creatures of habit, and if you go when the burglary happened, try and go to the time, replicate that the following day, the following week, you can get some good evidence. To me, it's crucial, and it was disappointing that it took that long for a collective decision to be made across the MPCC for that to be a priority. However, I have concerns because whenever we get something has to be taken away, and I believe that if you look at the national standards of the county rules for burglary, it not only includes burglary dwelling but also includes sheds and outbuildings. Now, you take over COVID, people have invested probably quite a lot of money in a home studio, maybe something built at the bottom of the garden if they're lucky enough to have a garden. That's got a fortune's worth of kit in it, their computers, their technology and other things, because they're working from home. So if we're only going to attend as a priority a burglary in a house, we might be doing a disservice to someone that's lost tens of thousands of pounds worth of kit in a shed or an outbuilding. It needs looking at properly, because my fear is that they're going to not count shed and outbuilding burglaries, so we're going to focus primarily on burglary dwellings. That's going to artificially inflate the detection rate for some, or that we've attended calls. It's a bit of smoke and mirrors, and I hope it's more than a headline. It needs a real substance to look at what that means.
I'm sure you've heard about this multiple stabbing in the City of London this morning. 3 men were stabbed as they tried to tackle some robbers who I think were trying to steal a mobile phone from somebody. They were on a motorbike. That actually happened to me not that long ago. And I mean, it happens and you think, oh, what was that? It just happens in a snapshot. And anyway, 3 people tackled these robbers and got stabbed for doing it. And I think everyone would think, well, that they were quite heroic in doing that. But is the advice still not to get involved? Because obviously I don't know the condition of the people who were stabbed, but they put themselves in harm's way, and we would all think they were heroes. But often you hear from the police, well, actually, you shouldn't really do that.
We do, and sometimes I feel frustrated because when the public don't see visible policing around, they feel the need to act themselves. And I would say to most people, don't get involved, be a good witness. Ironically, we criticise people for taking their phone out and recording something, but there's a time and a place when you have to step in. I suppose the difference for us as trained professionals with hopefully the right kit and equipment is we've had the training to understand how quickly someone can take a knife out, stab somebody and run away. It can happen in the blink of an eye, quite literally. At the time, they probably unconsciously made what they thought was a dynamic risk assessment, thinking they could get involved. However, they're probably not aware of the circumstances, and sadly, they've been stabbed. And, I'd offer my sincere thanks for trying to do what they thought was the right thing, and I hope they make a speedy recovery.
Well, I haven't got through all of the subjects I wanted to talk to you about, but we've got half an hour to go. But I'm going to devote that to callers putting questions directly to you. Or people who send in texts. 84850 is the text. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to talk to Steve. He's National Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. Never forget, we are streaming this whole hour on Global Player. It's 8:30 on LBC. Let's get the news headlines from Tim Daly.
The Prime Minister has refused to guarantee we won't have to live with planned blackouts this winter. Liz Truss has been speaking after the National Grid warned they may be needed because of gas shortages if the worst came to the worst. A group of celebrities and public figures are starting legal actions against the publishers of the Daily Mail. Claims of gross breaches of privacy are being cited by lawyers acting for the group, which includes Sir Elton John, Prince Harry and Baroness Doreen Lawrence, although Associated Newspapers is yet to comment. The United States has taken a step towards decriminalising marijuana. President Biden has granted an unconditional pardon to people convicted of possessing the drug. LBC weather. Showers for Northern Ireland and Scotland tonight, but mostly dry further south and a low of 8. Showers moving across England and Wales tomorrow, with sunshine and showers for Northern Ireland and Scotland. Highs of 18 degrees.
LBC Iain Dale. Text 84850. This is LBC.
8:33, we're streaming this programme live on Global Player, so I do hope you're watching us. If you are, you will see Steve Hartshorn is with me in the studio, National Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. Andy's in Edgware. Andy, hi, what would you like to say?
I'm just wondering how this police person thinks that anybody could trust the police at all. There's no trust there at all that they're there to do anything that's helpful to anybody. There's no trust. How are you meant to trust them to do what?
Steve?
Harass you.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, and I'm imagining you've perhaps gone through a process yourself where you feel you've been let down by the police, for which I need to understand the circumstances more before making a specific comment. If it's in relation to sort of general issues around policing that has rocked policing in terms of confidence issues, those things need fixing, absolutely, because what I would say to the members of the public out there that call for police is we as police officers want to do the absolute best job we can. We're there to help you. We'll do everything we possibly can to work with other agencies to get you the most help. We're there to help, so please don't try to lose trust. Stick with it, and if you need help, please get help.
But why do you think it is that people, I mean, okay, it might be personal circumstances if you've had a bad experience with the police, but do you think we in the media have a responsibility here too? Because we maybe highlight some things which, in your view, might not be so important. I mean, a lot of our listeners think, why on earth are the police spending time sort of chasing people who said hurty things on Twitter rather than chasing real criminals? And people think that maybe priorities are wrong.
Yes, I think when the public aren't sure what to do, they're going to call for help. So they'll actually call the police if they think it's a crime, if they've been offended or been besmirched, be it physically or on social media. For me, I want people to take advice because I don't want anybody to feel like they've got nowhere to turn to. Otherwise, they might turn to themselves and do something. But there's that acceptance that once we say it's not a crime, it's not for police, then they must go somewhere else. So that will hopefully address some of the social media stuff. In relation to are social media and journalists and mainstream media responsible, I think there's a degree of maybe trying to sensationalise things or trying to fill a gap with that desperate need to get information, because they're not always the only people that can provide that information now. With people have their own YouTube accounts, their own Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook. They can live stream, they can upload that information themselves. And I think sometimes there's a need to just stop, give police and other authorities the time they need to stabilise the situation, because historically we've had camera crews turn up to jobs, they're live streaming something that's taken place, it's potentially showing tactics that we use, which again, we have nothing to hide about what we do, but if that's then being streamed to the people within the building or people we're trying to deal with, they see what we're doing, and sometimes we just need nothing to be shown at all so we can operate safely, because we want to try and resolve those incidents as safely and as speedy as we can, given the confines of what we're dealing with.
Does that happen often?
It used to happen quite a lot, and I believe there's been some work done now at national level, certainly with the Metropolitan Police, just to speak to some of the big news providers, say, look, can you please have a blackout as such on don't report certain things or don't show certain things. By all means, we can't stop people recording from a public place at all, because that might be helpful to us. However, it's at that time, just give us that space where we can operate safely and effectively without having to worry about what we are going to do or may do.
0345 6060 if you'd like to put your question to Steve Hartshorn. And Mark, thank you very much, Andy. Mark is in Birmingham. Hello, Mark.
Hi, Ian. Hi, Steve. Yeah.
Hi.
Can I ask Steve, please, what's the best way of getting to grips with this knife crime that's nationwide, please, and possession of knives?
Thank you, Mark. For me, one of the aspects is using stop and search, which I know is controversial at times. I'd like to think we always did intelligence-led stop and search because that's the best way to be precise. There's at times when you just don't have the information, and for me, when I was an operational police officer out on the streets of London, or indeed on mutual aid at any part of the country, sometimes you get a very, very scant description of the suspect, what they're wearing, what they're looking like. When we have high visibility policing days, that has a marked effect on street crime, because it does deter, dissuade and prevent crime from taking place. I know some of the sentencing is supposed to be quite stringent, and if you're possession of what's termed a zombie knife or a great big killer knife, I I honestly don't think people who carry those think about that at the time. Sometimes they carry it for a misguided sense of it's for self-protection. I think if you look at some of the history around that, the injuries they get are probably inflicted with their own knives. I wish I had the answer to it. I think there's more education that needs to be done about the dangers of knife crime. For me, I'd like to see more police officers out on the street 24 hours a day. I think that does have a noticeable effect on the way people act and commit crime.
Mark, do you want to come back?
Yeah, do you think there should be an amnesty or something like that? Or, I don't know. I really don't know. I'm really worried about my two children going out there. You know, it's crazy, really, isn't it? There's got to be an answer.
It is.
You know, I think the government needs to start stepping up and helping you guys instead of putting the onus on you guys all the time. You know, you can't be solving everything now. I mean,
but what could the government do to help the police in the fight against knife crime, apart from sort of devote more resources to it, I suppose?
For me, it's a proper long-term sustainable funding package to get more police officers out there. I think we need to look at what policing actually should be for people, because quite rightly, and I've got family myself that go out at night and I want to make sure they're safe and protected. It's that visible presence is a start. There's a bigger education piece. I hear what he says about amnesties. I do believe there are regular amnesties across the country. However, every kitchen has got a knife in it, so you can't confiscate or hand in every knife. It's relatively easy to go into a shop. You can either buy one. If you're underage, you can probably steal one and run away with it. We're never going to stop those hardcore criminals that want to carry a knife and inflict pain and suffering on people. But what we can do is try and educate others about, if you know someone in your family is carrying a knife habitually, have a conversation with them, try to dissuade them from doing it, because by them being aware that other people know might just stop them. It's difficult. I really wish I had that sort of the magic answer to that, because it would stop so much anguish.
Mark, thank you very much. Let's go to Amanda in Haringey. Hello, Amanda.
Hi, is it me?
It is you. We haven't got any other Amandas on the switchboard. What would you like to ask?
Right. I suppose this question develops on the whole trust and confidence in police. My question is, what kind of resources have been invested in police services up and down the country, nationally and locally, around anti-racism training?
I generally wish I had the answer across the whole of policing. I can only talk about the training that I was given as in the Met Police when I was there on team, and we would have regular digital learning packages to talk about racism, what it means, what not to do. I think we miss a trick by not engaging with the community properly. Something that we've called for is protected learning time. At the National Federation of England and Wales, we have our own protected learning time policy, where we're saying that if you do anything in relation to your police duty, you should have some bespoke time where you can educate to get it right. We'd like that brought across the country so officers have proper training time. When I was on the firearms teams, I had to do a minimum of 120 hours every year before I could go out onto the streets to carry. We'd like the same for everybody else. And I think in terms of anti-racism, there needs to be a bigger education piece about what we need to do more to call it out. Because with the best one in the world, you look at the events that policing have been involved in recently, it's been incredibly busy. The first thing that go is training days and training time. If you can educate your workforce in a better way, that's got to help build bridges, because they can understand laws, powers, policy, procedures, but we can also get back to where we need to be at the heart of the community to speak to people to understand what that means and the real impact it has, that when someone is being racially abused, it's horrific. And they might go through that every single day, multiple times a day for years and years and years. We want to stop it. The last thing we want is people to feel vulnerable and threatened. And if there's more we can do, I'd say we need to work with communities in a better way to have that proper joint approach to stamp it out.
And do Black and Asian officers go on these courses too?
Everybody does.
I'm talking about anti-racism in terms of how police see possibly young black boys, in terms of works that focus around adultification and anti-racism through the eyes, through the lenses of maybe some of the white male and female police officers. So, yes, there's anti-racism in terms of community and racial abuse, absolutely, but I'm talking about the anti-racist training that police officers themselves receive in terms of their work and policing communities, different black and global majority communities. That's really what I'm talking about.
What do you think's going wrong at the moment, Amanda?
a lot. The adultification of young black men, the stop and search, the assumptions that are made, just the horrific events that have happened over the past few years. And, some of the inherent racism, some of the lack of understanding of the communities in which the police officers serve leads them to probably come with preconceived ideas about black and global majority citizens. So it is like...
I've never heard this phrase before, black and global majority. Just explain that.
Black and global majority derives from the idea that 85% of the global population is actually black or brown. So black people have been minoritized, and it is through the minoritized eyes that we are seen as somewhat possibly inferior, less than, or more targeted. So I don't subscribe to minority, because it is through the powers that be that black and global majority people have been minoritized. So it is about black and global majority people and their experiences that they face at the hands of the police officers who are there to serve them. A lot of the children in school don't feel protected. They don't feel that the police are there to protect them. And that's a sad indictment. I've just come from a governing board meeting where a head teacher said she won't allow the police officers back on the school premises because she doesn't believe that they've learned anything, and this is obviously post-child Q. And that's worrying. That's worrying because police, our safer schools officers should be there to protect our young people. But a lot of our young people do not feel that they are there to protect them. They're over-policed.
Right, well, let's get Steve's reaction to that. I mean, that's quite something to hear, all of that, isn't it? And I think Amanda is onto something in the way that maybe the police are perceived in some communities. Now, over the last 10 years or so, maybe more, the Met has tried to recruit more non-white officers. I don't know what the figures are nowadays. And I mean, we mustn't just restrict this to London as well. Do you understand where Amanda's coming from there?
I do, and I've heard it for a very long time. And indeed, when I joined the job at Hendon, I remember we had an input on race relations. I think it was probably mid-course, so it was probably week 8 or 9 of the training. And you remember it, and it's impactful. And I think at times people forget that we police the whole community. For me, it's education and training, and we need regular updates. It's disappointing that the schools won't allow officers back in because that's a breakdown of communication. We have to learn, we have to engage. We need to hear the harsh, brutal truth at times before people accept that if they're doing something wrong and they're not anti-racist, then they need to get with the programme, they need to learn and develop and understand. If there's more we can do, then that's absolutely the right thing they must be doing.
What in the Metropolitan Police, what percentage of serving officers are non-white?
I don't have the figures for the Met Police. I think across the country, within policing, I think it was about 14%, but I've not read the figures on what it looks like in terms of the current recruitment process.
I mean, 14% would reflect the general population, I think, but I mean, it's a shame you don't have the Met Police numbers to hand, because I think that is where a lot of the issues stem from, particularly because I think I'm right in saying that the non-white population in the London area is 40%. So you would expect, if you were going to reflect the local communities, certainly it ought to be up in that area. But I'm not sure the recruitment is at the moment. Right, we'll take Amanda. Great call. Thank you very much. We'll take more of your calls in a minute. That's Steve Hartshorn, who is National Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. He'll be with me until 9 o'clock. It's 8:47.
LBC Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 10 to 9 on LBC. Steve Hartshorn from the Police Federation of England and Wales is with us. Michelle is in Coventry. Michelle, hi. What's your question, please?
Hello. Thank you for taking my question. The new Home Secretary has come in and wrote to the police chiefs asking them to address woke policing. Now, given that big strides are being made in the police service to make respect and inclusivity and representation of all different diverse areas of the country and communities, what can be done about this, please?
Thank you for the question. Funnily enough, I thought that may well come up today. So I love the English language and like to know where words come from. So a bit of research that I did. And woke seemed to have originated in the 1940s about being alert to sort of racial injustice and being alive to it, which for me, that's what police officers are all about, alert to injustice and trying to put things right. So I think the word, if I'm honest, has been hijacked. It should be a good thing that we are alert to injustice for everybody to make sure it doesn't happen. From what I read, perhaps on Wikipedia, it's been hijacked by the far right to inflict pain on the far left as being overly politically correct, which was a term used many years ago about, if you want to do something properly, you're too politically correct. I think we need to look at what people are going through to understand that everybody has their own cause for concern, and we are there to try and address that to give people the support they so rightly need.
I think what Michelle is probably referring to, and maybe many others will agree with this, that do we need to see police officers doing the Macarena at a carnival? Do we need to spend thousands of pounds of valuable taxpayers' money on painting police cars with the gay rainbow flag on the side of it? It's that sort of thing that I suspect is referred to as sort of woke policing.
Okay, possibly not in some of those cases. However, as a police officer, part of my job is to build bridges and build relationships with the community that I'm policing. If I'm perhaps spending 5, 10, 15 minutes at a massive event trying to gain their trust, because ultimately in 15 minutes' time they are going to be asked to leave the bridge, the road, if I can build that confidence I'm treating them properly and engage with them, that might save me having to use powers policy. It doesn't look particularly good. People say, well, they should be doing real police work. Well, what is real police work? We're there to engage with the public. Go back to the Pelian principles. The police are the public are the police. We can't always rule by law and authority. We have to engage. Again, they don't look particularly good. However, for some of those people, they've had that engagement. It might be the only positive interaction they've had with the police for years. So I think it's incumbent we look at the circumstances more deeply before we perhaps jump to criticism. Some of it's probably well-founded because you think that is an awful lot of money which we could spend somewhere else. However, for that particular community, that might be the right thing to do to win over trust and get some confidence back.
Come back to that word trust, don't we?
We do.
I mean, in the end, it is all about trust. Policing is always, or it should be, by consent of the people. And do you feel at the moment that there is too much resistance to standard normal policing, partly because of some of the more high-profile cases where the police force has, for whatever reason, brought itself into disrepute?
I think at times as a police officer we perhaps forget that we do have the vast majority of the public on our side that allow us to police by consent. You look at the recent events with the passing of Her Majesty the Queen, and to get that kind of buy-in for the public to stand there in silence, to be good, to be largely well behaved, that's consent in its power. That is amazing to do, amazing to see. We look at some of the other bigger events that have taken place, G20, COP26. Again, the public are phenomenal at supporting the police. Obviously, things have happened in policing that have rocked that confidence. And I think from memory, looking at some of the figures, the IOPC, the Independent Office of Police Conduct, have probably got 250 to 300 police officers under investigation out of a total of 142,500, I believe it is. It's a really small minority. But again, we look at what law and order is. Everybody likes the theory of law and order until it's imparted on them, and then it becomes a different story. You stop someone for speeding, it's, go and catch burglars, go and do your job properly. Well, we are trying to do, because crime happens in vehicles as well. So we don't always have the right answers, but we try to do the best we can, and we do want to get back to everybody understanding that the police force, I believe, can be trusted.
George, I suspect with his tongue slightly in his cheek, says, I'd rather see police officers doing the Macarena than sending vile messages on WhatsApp. Michelle, thank you very much. Let's go to Charlie, who's a new caller in Sutton. Hello, Charlie.
Hello there. Happy evening.
Hi.
Basically, it was just going on what your listener before called up about the knife crime for our children. It is becoming disgustingly horrific. My son is in year 7. 2 of his friends have been held up by knives for their phones, for their money. What is there that my son can carry, that is legally okay to protect himself? I make sure my son does not take a knife out of my house. I actually pat him down. I also spot check him on the way home from school when available, that he will not hurt anyone else nor himself. However, he does suffer with autism slightly. He doesn't understand tone nor facial expression. He doesn't get sarcasm. So if someone is to hold him up and be sarcastic, he will not understand that. And I'm not having my son bleed out in the street. What can he take to defend himself appropriately and not illegally?
First off, you sound like a great mum by physically checking your son to make sure he's not carrying anything, ideally of high value, but also any weapons. Is a fantastic step to take, and I wish every other parent took that care. Obviously, with the neurodiversity of your son having autism makes it incredibly difficult, because they will interact differently to someone who doesn't have autism to being held up in the street. Sadly, there isn't anything that you can carry legally to try and deter that. Again, for me, it comes back to having more visible policing on the streets, more community involvement to start looking for some of these things taking place. And if they see something they don't think is right, call us, let us know. I'd rather turn up to 20, 30 calls a day for a misunderstanding of what someone's doing and deal with it appropriately than not be called at all. Because I've had friends before who've shown me their own sort of local CCTV and said, this happened at 3 o'clock this morning. I said, have you told your local police? No, there's no point, we won't turn up. I said, you must do. Because if we don't know that crime's happening and taking place, we can't respond to it. That's what we need to be told all the time. And I think that will then help inform, because we've got this level of policing of 142,000 odd police officers. Well, who sets the requirement for that? In the last 10 years, we've had 4 million increase in population. The policing officer numbers haven't gone up to carry that. So for me, it comes back to being very operational. And what is the operational requirement for police? How many do we need? And what do the public want? I know what I want. I want to see coppers out on the street to deal with that crime. I also want more detectives to be able to deal with it, and we catch these people and process them and deal with it appropriately through the courts.
It's a really interesting point that Charlie makes there about us on sort of with these different conditions, because a police officer, or indeed anyone else, will not know that. And the way that the police speak to the general public, whether it's a 12-year-old or a 25-year-old or a 65-year-old, I think is so important. And you often hear, I mean, it's just anecdotal evidence, but I've experienced it myself, where somebody's incredibly sarcastic. And you think, well, is there any really need for that? And then the next police officer you come across will be the most polite person you've ever met in your life, and you know which one you respect more.
You're right, and for me, it's I speak to people like I'd like to be spoken to myself, until they do something where I have to sort of up the level of engagement to make sure they understand what I'm saying, because it should be a conversation. Even when I've dealt with things as a farms officer, I can just have a normal conversation as we're doing now and talk to somebody, knowing that at some point I may have to take a decisive action to potentially take their life. You don't always have to go in at a really high level, especially with someone that has a neurodiverse condition. It's important that, again, there's more training, because as people become aware of it, in this country, I believe it's 1 in 5 males has ADHD. I don't have the figures for for autism or other types of neurodiversity, but we need to learn more how we can engage with them to protect them better.
Charlie, thank you very much for that. Let's finish off with Ted in Hildenborough. Hello, Ted.
Oh, hello. I've written out a little statement that I'd like Steve to hear, which I hope is from all the honest and law-abiding people in the country. Thank you very much, Steve, to you and all your officers for helping to keep us all safe. The small, tiny majority of bad officers get all the publicity, whereas the vast majority of the good officers seldom get all the thanks that they need. So a very big thank you to you, Steve, and all your officers on behalf of me and all the people that I know. Thank you very much.
And we have actually had, Ted, thank you very much. We have had quite a few texts and tweets along that. I'll read this one out from Janine, who says, not sure this will make it through the LBC Iain Dale filter. But my 5-year-old loves the police. They smile, joke, laugh and dance with him much better than seeing horrific WhatsApps. I will take the Macarena any day, so let's celebrate the warmth, fun and good and stop bashing them. I mean, and a lot of people have said how great it is that you've come into the studio to face questions, and there's one person in particular who's impressed by your tie.
Well, thank you very much. For me, it's a pleasure. I would like to do this more often because that public engagement is crucial. That if they can ask somebody that's been an operational police officer but engaged at a different level to try and help understand what we do, that's part of my job. And I think if you get time to speak to your local officers when they're not busy running around dealing with calls, they would love to engage and speak to you about it, because policing is amazing. We do some really good things, but we only tend to get noticed when it's not gone to plan.
Well, we'll have you back early in the new year. How about that?
I look forward to it. I really do. Thank you.
Steve, thank you very much indeed. That's Steve Hartshorn, National Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. It is 9 o'clock on LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the government's being urged to call an emergency meeting to address the possibility households could experience planned blackouts this winter. It's after the national grid warned of 3-hour power cuts if gas supplies run extremely low, although it's saying that's an unlikely scenario. Jo Spears is a full-time carer for her autistic son and is worried.
There are so many families in a position where they have life-saving machines at home running all the time.